This passage again shows a range of standard ways of talking about things, vocabulary, grammatical structures, rhetorical hooks that we see characteristic of the Johannine letters. And I want to talk through some of the poetic aspects in particular of verses 12 and following. First, a quick breakdown. Agapetoi, evocative, slightly outside the structure. And then we've got what's being written with a contrastive ala. And then a relative clause. And then you've got your entelair as the beginning of the next clause, defined by the logos, which is then given its own relative clause. So quite a messy embedding of clauses there, but not too difficult to read once you're there. Palin entelen. So you've got another phrase there with another relative clause coming afterwards. And then a hoti, which could be a that or a because, explaining what it is about the darkness passing away, and connective and the light shining. You've now got hologon, your substantive participle yet again, and then the various actions happening with that speaker. And then you've got another substantive participle. If you look at it, verses 9, 10 and 11 all start with ho participle. This is very characteristic of the text that we're studying here. So the one that does love his brother lives in the light, and there's no stumbling block. The one who hates his brother, he lives in the darkness, and he doesn't know where he's going because the darkness blinded his eyes. So again, lots of little phrases here, lots of repeated words, lots of repeated hooks. The vocab itself here isn't too difficult, which is helpful. I'll carry on with the phrasing a little bit. Grapho, we now get a repeated thing. Grapho humin, grapho humin, grapho humin. So we've got teknia, pateres, neaniskoi. Balanced up with agrapsa 3 times. And we've got paidia, pateres, neaniskoi. Now, these are the only 2 uses of neaniskoi in these texts. It's otherwise not that rare a word, but it's the only place it's used in this text. Pateres is obviously quite common. Teknia for paidia. You can see that teknia echoing the beginning of the chapter. Unusual word. 8 out of 9 uses in the John letters. Paidia being much more common. There are 52 of them. So we're watching the author here play with synonymous words. So you've got the nice structure, grapho, 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 agrapsa, 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 but you've also got variatio within that, even in simple things like paidia for teknia. But also, if you look at the neaniskoi line, for example, you've got the extra hoti iskuroi este, which isn't there back in verse 12. And then the section finishes with some instructions. Don't love one thing, nor things in the world. If someone does, this is the consequence. This is the explanation. Love of God is not in him. Everything that is in the world, and now you've got a long her epithumia all the way down to her elastonea to biu, are all explaining Pan. So they're telling you where they're not from. They're not from the Father, but they are part of the world. The world passes away, and then epithumia is adding in an extra subject to that. The one who does the will of God remains forever. So in terms of phrasing, there's lots of short phrases again. In terms of balance and grammar, there are lots of pretty things about this. I've pointed out a few already. Let's have a look at a few more. First of all, you've got the imperfect of eichete, echo. You've continuously had this command right from the beginning. It shows you one of the ways in which this new commandment is building on stuff that's already going, and it's a really lovely use of the imperfect there to show you continuity. You've then got the commandment, which is the old one, is the word which you heard. That's fairly straightforward. You get the relative clause explaining the commandment. But the next verse, you get ho, which is a neuter relative pronoun, referring back to this new commandment, or rather to its contents. So you change from the new commandment to what the new commandment contains. So you change from the feminine commandment to the contents of it, which can be expressed using a neuter. You've also got both alerthes and alerthinos, two adjectives for true used next to each other. Now, alerthinos declines much more easily than alerthes, just like neaniskos declines much more easily than neanias. So one of the things you see in these texts is the easier form of the word to decline coming in more and more often. But in this case, both are used right next to each other. In the first couple of verses of this chapter, you saw holegon menein, the one claiming to remain. Verse 9, you've got the same construction, the one claiming to be, the one who says that he is. You've got another indirect statement using an infinitive in a more classical style. Yet hating his brother. Carrying on, most of the next phrases are pretty straightforward and pretty linear. I've already pointed out the repeated substantive participles. We get then to the more poetic bit. Apheontai is a difficult word, and this is a perfect form of aphiemi. Reiterating the kind of use of the perfect that we get all the way through this text. The perfect is very important in showing things happening and changing stuff as they go along. And we get that again with egnorkate, nenekerkate, egnorkate, egnorkate, nenekerkate. So the impact of the perfect becomes a refrain through this section. We've got tomponeron, the wicked. Adjective as a substantive, goes to one, becomes a way of giving you Satan without expressing him. That use of the adjective to be the substantive is very typical of the New Testament, particularly when it comes to expressing someone like Satan. And that's repeated again then at the end of the section. If we look at the final section, don't go hating the world, nor ta ento cosmo. Now, ta is fantastic here. Again, it's the neuter giving you contents, the contents of what is in the world. I was trying to think about what noun one might put in here if one were going to try and rewrite this. The what is it that's in the world? You could say don't love the world, but this is specifically extended with the ta, using that neuter to then give you a division of stuff that is within the world. And you might want to be thinking about pragma, krema, any words like that. What is it that you would actually put in there? What is it that constitutes this contents of the world? It's an interesting thing to think about, even if you've not got it there in front of you to look at. We've then got the indefinite again, ean. How do you express the indefinites? If ever anyone were to be desirous of the things in the world, then there's consequentially a really harsh thing. The love of a father is not in them, very definitely. So you move from the vague to the specific in terms of generic background and specific outcome. Everything else in this passage does more or less just continue the sorts of phrasing we've already seen, including hore poion, the one who does. You've got that substantive participle again.